Imagine a world where the scars of slavery were healed, where justice was served, and where freedom truly meant opportunity. This was the dream behind one of the most famous and broken promises in American history: 40 acres and a mule. But to understand this story, we must first go back to the beginning, to the roots of slavery in America and the Civil War that nearly tore the nation apart. For over 2 centuries, slavery was the backbone of the American economy. Enslaved Africans were forced to work on plantations, producing cotton, tobacco, and other crops that made the United States one of the wealthiest nations in the world. But this wealth came at a horrific cost: the dehumanization, exploitation, and suffering of millions of people. By the mid-19th century, the abolitionist movement was gaining momentum. Leaders like Frederick Douglass, Harriet Tubman, and Sojourner Truth fought tirelessly to end slavery. Meanwhile, the nation was deeply divided. The Southern states, dependent on slavery, seceded from the Union after Abraham Lincoln's election in 1860, sparking the Civil War. The Civil War, which lasted from 1861 to 1865, was the bloodiest conflict in American history. Over 600,000 lives were lost as the Union fought to preserve the nation and the Confederacy fought to maintain its way of life. But as the war dragged on, it became clear that the fight was about more than just states' rights. It was about the future of slavery in America. In 1863, President Abraham Lincoln issued the Emancipation Proclamation, declaring that all enslaved people in Confederate states were free. While this was a monumental step, it didn't immediately end slavery. It took the Union's victory in 1865 and the passage of the 13th Amendment to abolish slavery nationwide. With freedom came new challenges. Over 4 million African Americans were suddenly free, but they had no land, no money, and no resources. Many had spent their entire lives enslaved, with no opportunity to build wealth or gain an education. What would freedom really mean for them? Enter General William T. Sherman. In January 1865, as the Civil War neared its end, Sherman and Secretary of War Edwin Stanton met with 20 African American leaders in Savannah, Georgia. These leaders, many of whom were ministers, expressed their desire for land, a place where they could build homes, grow crops, and create a future for their families. Sherman listened. On January 16, 1865, he issued Special Field Orders No. 15. This revolutionary order set aside 400,000 acres of confiscated Confederate land along the coast of South Carolina, Georgia, and Florida. The land was to be divided into 40-acre plots and distributed to newly freed African American families. Some would even receive an army mule to help them work the land. For a brief moment, it seemed like the United States was on the verge of a radical transformation. Formerly enslaved people could finally own land, build wealth, and control their own destinies. By June 1865, around 40,000 freedmen had settled on 400,000 acres of Sherman's land. But this dream was short-lived. After President Abraham Lincoln was assassinated in April 1865, his successor, Andrew Johnson, took office. Johnson, a Southern sympathizer, had very different ideas about Reconstruction. He believed in a lenient approach toward the former Confederate states and their leaders. Johnson quickly reversed Sherman's orders. He issued pardons to former Confederates, restoring their land and political rights. The land that had been given to freedmen was taken back and returned to its former owners. Thousands of black families were forced off the land they had been promised. The promise of 40 acres and a mule was shattered. Instead of reparations, African Americans were left to navigate a harsh and unequal society. Many turned to sharecropping, a system that kept them in a cycle of poverty and debt. Others faced violence and intimidation from groups like the Ku Klux Klan. But the dream didn't die. The phrase, 40 acres and a mule, became a powerful symbol of the fight for reparations and racial justice. During the civil rights movement of the 1950s and 1960s, leaders like Martin Luther King Jr. and Malcolm X invoked the promise as a call for economic equality. Today, the legacy of 40 acres and a mule continues to inspire. Movements for reparations, land redistribution, and racial justice are still fighting to address the economic disparities rooted in slavery and Jim Crow. The question remains, what does justice look like in a nation built on the exploitation of black labor? To truly understand the impact of 40 acres and a mule, we need to hear the stories of the people who lived through this era. Take, for example, the story of Tunis Campbell, a freedman who became a political leader in Georgia. Campbell helped establish black communities on Sherman's land, but after Johnson's reversal, he was forced to flee for his life. Or consider the story of Callie House, a formerly enslaved woman who became a leader in the early reparations movement. In the 1890s, House organized thousands of African Americans to petition the government for pensions as compensation for their unpaid labor during slavery. These stories remind us that the fight for justice is not just about policies, it's about people. It's about the lives that were forever changed by slavery and the broken promises that followed. The story of 40 acres and a mule is more than just a historical footnote. It's a reminder of what could have been and what still could be. It challenges us to confront the injustices of the past and work toward a more equitable future. So what can we do? We can educate ourselves about this history. We can support movements for reparations and racial justice. And we can have honest conversations about how to address the lasting impact of slavery and systemic racism. Thanks for watching. If you found this story important, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more deep dives into history. Let's keep the conversation going in the comments below. What do you think about the legacy of 40 acres and a mule? And what does justice look like to you?